And now. Oh, nice. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. You guys are the section that has the coolest toys.
Yeah.
All right. Here we go. Got some people joining us. Good morning, everybody, for our coffee time talk with the Asheville Symphony and the percussion section. Forgive me, I'm on my phone, so you'll see my hands because I'm trying to rotate between different things, but we cannot see you, you can see us. So if you'd like to ask questions of the percussion section and the Asheville Symphony, feel free to do so in the chat box or in the question box at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Amanda, I will ask for your help if I miss any of the questions, just because I'm on the phone, so it's hard for me to follow both platforms. But it's nice to see we already have over 20 people joining, so thank you for spending your morning with us. I happen to be in Europe, so I'm in the evening, but that doesn't matter. We're gonna have a wonderful time. And I pressed something bad, so okay, here we go. Still learning after 6 months, go figure. Anyway, with me here today, we have three of our percussionists from the section, Brian Tinkle, Matthew Richmond. Matthew is our acting principal percussionist. Brian works with the youth orchestra as one of the instructors, and Todd Mueller is our principal timpanist. So welcome, great to have you, great to see you again. The percussion section. This is one of the most, let's say, athletic sections in the orchestra, right? It's one of the most fun sections to watch. Would you agree?
I do agree.
Yeah.
You concur.
At least that's what I always thought when I watched orchestras.
Well, I've never had anybody else say, you really need to reseat the orchestra so, the trumpet can be seen.
Right.
The only thing I've ever had in my discussions is like, make sure the timpani is up front at the back so we can see it. It's such a dramatic thing. But and that's a light way to say it. But really, you guys are musicians just like the rest of the orchestra. All jokes aside, but it's a completely different approach than anything else. So I'll just like to go around the room and share with us your perspective. What is it like being in the back? What is it like for you? Being part of the Asheville Symphony and performing in concerts.
Yeah.
Who would like to start? Todd, jump in.
Matthew.
Brian.
I muted for a second. What was the question?
Oh yeah.
I'm sorry, I was coughing.
I love it. No, the question was what? You'll start. Okay. So the question is what it's like just being in the back.
Oh.
Yeah. I'll tell you, we don't realize how different it is until we get up in the front for something like when we did
Bolero,
and Brian and I were up in the middle of the orchestra doing the snare drums, and suddenly, wow, you can hear everybody. You feel like part of the group. It's amazing.
That's also the pleasure of being in our beloved hall. But I digress.
Yes.
Indeed.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing that's different for us, I think, is that, most of a string player is playing all the time. They've got a bunch of other people on their same part. We have a lot of pieces where we don't do a lot, but that one thing we come in and play has to be just perfect.
It's like the New Yorker cartoon.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
don't miss it. Don't miss it. Don't miss it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I think there's a Triangle New Yorker cartoon, right? About don't miss it.
Is it triangle?
Yeah, that's what you're talking about.
It's I thought it was symbols. Yeah. I thought it was symbols.
That's the Far Side, where he's like, don't screw up, but he's only holding one symbol. Right.
Forgive me, I'm just a percussion cartoon amateur.
Yeah.
Well, I'm an aficionado,
not a practitioner. Either instrument, triangle or symbols for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when you're talking about placement in the back of the orchestra, it is very interesting from a timpanist perspective. And I was just watching, a lot of the orchestras around that are out there right now are putting out more digital content. And so I'm not a subscribing member anymore of the Berlin Philharmonic, but they did have a a short video about their timpanist of 30 years, going back to Carry On's days. And he talked about his position with the Berlin Philharmonic. And in Philharmonie, it's right up in the back in the middle. And you get a great, I would say, I don't know this because I've never sat in the conductor's podium, but I would say probably second only to that position perspective if you're sitting up in the middle. And that's why I've always enjoyed that position, because you can, if you're up especially, you can hear the entire orchestra and perceive the different sounds in a kind of central position, which I enjoy. I have been moved around, and there's different orchestras that have different philosophies about this, but it's very interesting as a percussionist because we play with different sections, and especially the timpanist as well. Sometimes you'll be playing with the low basses, a small, they're doing a pizzicato note, and you have to touch it and change the timbre on the timpani. And if you're sitting in that section, there's a great homogeneous feeling that can happen with that. But oftentimes we're sitting at the back of like the second violins where there's not much going on that's in our particular sound area. So it's an interesting thing to experience being moved around, I would think, because there's a lot of different things that you'll notice sitting in a different part of the orchestra. What do you think about that, Matthew and Brian?
I was going to comment, I was going to kind of piggyback on what Matthew had said about usually our notes are soloistic in nature because there's no doubling. But I find that the timing, and I think this kind of ties into what you're talking about, I believe, Todd, that the timing of what we do relative to where we are. I find that while I'm watching sometimes for a certain attack or whatever, I need to be listening and I need to then be playing like on top of what I'm hearing, or else I'm going to be late. And of course, it depends on who we're late to, I know a lot of times we're upstage right. So a lot of times the trumpets are upstage left. And so there's times when I have to like make eye contact with the trumpet section to see like what they're doing to try to make sure that I can fit my music in. And of course, I think that ties into what you guys were saying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Has it ever? Oh, sorry.
No. And I've even seen, in different concerts, just placing the snare drummer in the trumpet section, just to make sure that timing is perfect, depending on the piece, of course,
Yeah.
Shostakovich.
Is it weird being next to the horns, because the horns have to anticipate so far ahead for their sound? They're blowing, they breathe in, they blow, the sound comes, goes the wrong way, and then comes to the front of the house. Whereas, if you're hitting a percussion instrument, the sound is basically instantaneous upon striking. Is that disconcerting? Does that throw you off?
It can sometimes, but it's only one of many things that we're hearing that are at odd times.
Yes, well.
So, like Brian was saying, if you have to line up with somebody who's on the other side of the stage, you're having to use visual cues,
right,
and you're having to estimate how quickly your sound is going to move and all sorts of things. And the only thing that bothers me about the horns is that they're pointing in our faces. So when they have a fortissimo, that's all we can hear.
It's loud.
Yeah, and we're percussionists. We don't mind loud.
And they think we're loud.
Man,
it's a war back and forth.
Loud for sure.
Yeah.
Do you use protective devices to protect your hearing when you're in the back?
Occasionally.
It depends, yeah.
Yeah. The only time I think I ever use them is when the horns are directly in front of us.
I have spent seasons in Asheville with earplugs in, and I bought some of the very expensive ones that apparently they cut all the decibels across, flat across the high end and the low end, because most earplugs will just, cut high end. I've spent seasons doing that, but for some reason I always go back to just listening without protection in. So,
I might place an earplug in because I find that if I put earplugs in, it impairs my ability, ironically, to hear what I need to hear. But there might be times where if I'm playing cymbals or someone else is playing cymbals, and I know that I might like put the earplug in just for that section of music or the horns or whatever the case may be.
So I love this. You bring up when I'm playing cymbals, when I'm playing something else. You guys are unique in the orchestra in that your facility across instruments is unparalleled. I mean, we're talking when you're playing percussion, what we can have seven different instruments, seven players in the orchestra, 8 players on the bigger pieces, and it's really kind of amazing to think what it's like to prepare for that, and the situations are completely different because just it's not hitting anything. It's like different mallets, different shapes. What is it like actually like becoming a percussionist in terms of training, approaching that variety of skills? It's not just a reed or just a mouthpiece kind of thing.
I always start by saying, it's good for those who have the attention deficit problems, just to take that lightly. But as soon as we, I actually do this. I'm cyclical in nature, and I'll practice an instrument intensely. And when I reach a plateau or a level, I want to do something different. And I know a lot of people are like that. That's kind of our nature, but percussion is perfect for that, because then we can go, move from one instrument to the other. So in the orchestra, I'm obviously playing timpani, but in my training, it was not like that. And there was a lot of debate between, should you specialize, should you focus, what should you focus on? So I did focus on timpani, but every year I was playing 4-mallet marimba solos for recitals and vibraphone and cymbals, and hours in the practice room, trying to get the right cymbal crash and triangle technique. And each instrument, you have to be able to play it in an orchestral setting, but each country is going to have a different, well, a lot of times I should say this, each country or each style period, they're going to have their own unique approach to how to play that instrument. So you're not
using necessarily the same instrument depending on the piece, right?
In a different way.
You'll use bigger cymbals, smaller cymbals, and the approach is different.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I had the absolute passage of fire. The only time I ever played any percussion in the orchestra, because conductors, like in grad school, they toss you like, come on, just go hit something.
Yeah.
It was Carnival Overture cymbal part.
Nice. How did you?
Not a good place to jump in.
Side reading.
Yeah.
Hey Todd,
I did make it to the end. I don't know. I just remember my hands hurting. Like I was like, what is this? This is not natural.
Yeah.
They're like, well, turn it this way. There was somebody next to me who knew what they were doing, but I was like, come on.
Hey Todd, while we're on the subject, why don't you explain the big question we always get, which is, what is the relationship of the timpanist to the percussion section?
Oh, well.
Yeah.
We hit the drum. I mean, the relationship is that we're all percussion instruments, and that but it's interesting because that goes into the history of the orchestra more than any other topic, because the timpani and percussion in general don't make it into the orchestra until they're considered basically special effects. That's the way I generally present that topic. I say until opera needed war scenes, needed to call kind of extra musically on the ideas of the battlefield. Percussion doesn't make it in the orchestra, and that's really happening in the late 1700s. Timpani comes in a little bit earlier in opera and in instrumental music with the trumpets, but it's still a kind of an outdoor signaling extra musical association that they're bringing into the orchestra. So in the same regard, they're late to the game, percussion and timpani, but timpani comes in a little bit earlier. So I would say timpani, the way I think about it and the way I teach the instrument is that you need to think of it like you're playing a brass instrument when you begin. You're playing an instrument along with the second and third trumpet, and that's where we're voiced in a lot of the earlier repertoire. As we get later in the repertoire, it becomes more of a percussion instrument, or we bring out more of the percussion side of it. So I think that the most interesting thing, Matthew, thank you for setting this one up on a tee. The most interesting thing and the most fun thing about being a timpanist is choosing what your role is in any particular piece. And I like to use the terms heterogeneous or homogeneous. Am I going to play like I'm a choir member where I am inside the sound of the other instruments, and I don't want to be sticking out on the top. And there are amazing players, and I've taken lessons with some great players who that's their philosophy of sound, and it's beautiful, and it's a wonderful way of playing timpani. Or am I going to play on the what we call the heterogeneous side, which is, hey, I'm a drummer and I'm going to bang the hell out of it, and you're going to feel the power of the drums, and that's completely applicable in different pieces. So that's more, I call it my New York Bernstein, Saul Goodman side, and the percussionists who get it. Saul Goodman was a very famous timpanist who taught my teacher, and he played under Bernstein in New York for many
Wasn't
many
Saul
years.
Goodman a character on Breaking Bad?
Yeah, it's all good, man. Yeah. Yeah, so for me that was kind of hard to take. So,
Wow.
so yes,
Very
Breaking
cool.
Bad character and famous timpanist. That's how we approach it. Yes.
It's a good pairing. I will say, from my perspective as a conductor, you notice great timpani players, and you notice not great timpani players. And the ones you don't notice are actually pretty great. So I should say, like, it's really when you're faced with a piece and you have an inexperienced person behind the timpani, it is impossible to do anything. It's such a driver of the orchestra. It's something the entire orchestra hears every single time and is dependent on, often subconsciously, on playing together. And when it's the recent case, I remember I had a situation of doing concerto for orchestra, and Todd was not there.
Wow.
Nor Brian nor Matthew. And it's kind of piece where the timpani dominates, and really we see the visual element of the and we hear it, but it's like a glue inside the orchestra. It's a foundation for me. We have a question from Carol. Todd, is how you play not up to the conductor and what he wants to bring out? There's
no.
Yeah.
No. It's a two-way street, with everything. It certainly is. I'm sorry, I'm trying to find that question, and what he wants to bring out. Okay, he or she wants to bring. Well, the idea is that it's a collaborative relationship. An orchestra is. There are certainly times when I have been in an orchestra where my main goal, where the conductor wanted something and they wanted something specifically, and it went against what my artistic choice would be, and you give it to the conductor, depending on your role, in your place in that orchestra. And then there's other times where the conductor is very open to your interpretation. I think that it's about building a relationship, and I think that's important. You have to build a relationship with the conductor, and so they will understand. And I think Darko and I have been working on this, and we have a good relationship, but they understand where your artistic decisions would be based, and you understand where they are, and then you work to find the best result for both of you. Is that political enough?
It's another interesting parallel with like Brian was saying earlier about how everything percussionists do is soloistic. If you're a string player, you're in a section where everybody is expected to do it the same way, and the interpretation comes down from the principal. But everything we do, we're making a lot of our own choices about how should this sound, what kind of mallet should I use, what sort of articulation should it be, and then if the conductor doesn't like it, he'll tell us and we'll adjust and we'll figure out something that works. But we have a lot of freedom and therefore responsibility to decide how to interpret things as individuals.
If I could piggyback on that.
Please.
I mean, there'll be times, and again, these are things that happen leading up to the rehearsal. Obviously, we'll all come and have these decisions predetermined. And then we'll try out our implement or a certain volume in the hall. And then we'll even ask each other, there's times when I'll be like, Matthew, is this snare drum, can you hear the articulation? Or somebody might say, oh, what about this mallet? I've been using these mallets. Which ones do you like better? And we'll also try to,
I mean, you
help
guys
each
go
other
out and
with
listen
that.
for each other. You go into the hall
Yeah,
and listen, not
we've
just
done
on the
that.
stage, but especially, oftentimes you'll have a piece where there's more people called than necessary. Like you'll have 5 people in one piece, 3 on the other, so people listen constantly. And I love that about your section, just worldwide. It's a beautiful habit. Yeah, I will piggyback on this topic and say, well, frankly, most conductors don't have a clue about percussion playing. I confess, I don't. I never studied the instruments. You can read in a book what it's like, and you learn from experience. There's some tricks of the trade you kind of pick up along the way. But ultimately, when I respond, I think of it in terms of character and color. Coming back to color, I mean, for the standard repertoire coming where we are, the function of percussion initially is to add color to the orchestra. And so, is it dominant or is it complementary? That's one choice I can comment on. And then does it fit into the color of the sound maybe that I have in mind for the orchestra? But even then, yeah, I'll come and I'll hear something like, I never even thought that was possible. How do you do that? I remember very well the first time I did Dvorak's Ninth Symphony in the 4th movement. When it goes into the 2nd theme, there's an isolated cymbal crash. And if you listen to recordings of this, there's like a little gurgle in the clarinets, and sometimes it's like, what? That makes no sense. And then somebody in one point scraped the cymbals. I was like, and it was like such a beautiful new sound. I never I'm okay. I was young at the time. I was 20 years old, but like, it was like, wow, you can do that. And the cool thing with your instruments, they're really in a way evolving how you can approach them. A cymbal and a note, the composer also, in the standard repertoire would just put one note. There's no indication how to play it. And now as technology has developed, we really have so many different ways to approach it. Could you speak a little bit to that maybe? Like workshop element of being a percussionist.
Yeah. Well, one thing that comes to my mind as you say that, when you said a lot of conductors don't know much about percussion, which is true, we can also say a lot of composers don't know a whole lot about percussion.
I was going to add that too, yeah.
Yeah. Quite often we're interpreting things that don't make sense, or we're trying to get something to work that isn't well written, or it's just really, really vague. And we have to figure out what the composer wanted and what makes the most sense.
Or it was a trick that composer learned from a percussionist friend that they had at that moment in that city. Mm-hmm. And we're trying to find the key. What is the key to that? Like I always think of Enigma variations. There's Motorboat. We're supposed to play snare drum sticks on the timpani, which is a cardinal sin for us.
Is there a penny or not a penny?
Yeah, should you use coins? Because after they went to the first rehearsal, that was the sound that Elgar liked. It was a motorboat leaving out to sea. So, yeah, it's interesting.
Well, a lot of times we'll also bring multiple instruments, at least in the percussion section. The last time I played tambourine, I brought 3 tambourines and tried each one to see which was the best sound. So.
And I think that's something that probably the panelists, or I'm sorry, we're the panelists, probably the audience here is not aware of, is the amount of instruments we have to own to try to get those perfect sounds. It's not like we all have one snare drum and one pair of cymbals and one triangle and we take it to each gig. No, we have a variety of instruments. It's not uncommon for percussionists to have, 10 triangles to choose from and to have triangles that they love for specific pieces. This is my Mahler triangle. This is my, triangle. So,
do you get into alloys? Is that a thing?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Well,
yeah. In the triangle world, I mean, specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What, like more nickel, less silver?
Well, I wouldn't say we know the specific percentages, but we definitely have the different metals. I mean, tell them about your tambourines, Brian. Tell them the tambourines that you brought. What were?
Well, so triangles and tambourines, the alloys, the metals. I mean, there's a brighter sounds tend to have more silver in them, and then the darker sounds are bronze, and then there's mixes and they're coming up with a lot of different varieties of tambourines now. I mean, when I was in college, we pretty much had like silver, bronze, and mixed. You know what I mean? And that was a lot of choices. But things. I mean, if I have a triangle gig, I'll bring multiple sizes, and some are brass or bronze, some are silver. Again, I don't know the chemical makeup, the exact makeup of what it is. And then, of course, the different beaters can create different sounds, where exactly you play, how you play, all of those things. Do
you ever make your own mallets?
I have. Yeah, I have.
I've experimented with making my own, and it was too much trouble for me. It's really an art form unto itself that I did not have the patience for.
Wow. I think with timpani, you kind of got to learn to make, at least rewrap your own. You don't have to make the initial one, and I think that you guys both agree with me on certain instruments. Rewrapping.
How does one do that? How does that work? Show us a mallet. You're in the studio.
Yeah,
now,
hold on.
Right?
Give me.
Can you let's show the audience, do a little show and tell.
Then we had another question. I don't know if you guys had a chance to read it, or maybe it was a statement.
Yeah, it's more of a comment.
More of a comment.
Yeah.
From Lee. Hi, Lee. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Are you waiting for me?
That.
Okay.
Been there. Here we go. Here's our mallet selection. What do we got here?
These are some of them. So with my mallets, most of my mallets come with a screw on them where you can take off the head of the mallet. And inside it, there is a core of wood or felt. This one is a felt mallet. Mm-hmm. And basically what happens is we get sheets of either German or American felt for timpani. And we know the right thickness for each mallet, and whether we want to use the inside of the felt or the outside of the felt, how many inches. I have a chart written out of all of this, and we know how many layers of felt we want to use. And basically, I can change out a mallet. I can rewrap a mallet for a particular piece. I've brought my materials to Asheville before, played, realized that my mallets, I had wrapped them too thickly for that hall, and had to go back to where I was staying and rewrap my mallets to make thinner, to make a harder sound. So
wow.
This is and probably of more interest. This is part of our lessons growing up. You know, like going to clinics, sitting down with the people who passed this tradition down to us. Same with changing heads, or it'd be like reed making for a woodwind player.
I just love that there's somebody out there whose sole job is to make timpani felt.
Yeah. Well, I doubt it. I think that they make felt for other things. I don't know what for, but yeah. But I used to order from people in Germany, but nowadays there's Americans that are producing all of it. So, but it's interesting. On the floor right here, I have my unwaxed dental floss. That's what I use to sew everything with. So, it's another aspect of our craft that is probably goes unnoticed to most.
Wow. I travel with dental floss in case of emergency.
Yeah, that's
it's the best thing to sew things together. I always have something in my backpack. Yeah.
Gotcha.
But wow, that's I love these little quirks.
Yeah, I think our equivalent we'd just bring different sticks and mallets, different shades of whether it's a Glock mallet or a Xylo mallet or a snare drum stick with a different bead size or whatever the case may be.
Right.
But in a percussion section, you're constantly constructing ways to set up the instruments so that everything will work, creating a triangle bar so that you can hang your triangle and then get over to the tambourine and then get back over to the marimba to play some passage. So
that's a good point.
Wow.
I always say with percussionists, one of the things we learn, and we do this in college, most of us, and by playing extremely difficult parts in percussion ensembles, and I know both of you guys teach percussion ensemble, and in wind orchestras that play a lot of contemporary music, is we get a lot of training in what I call the percussion choreography, which is simply where am I going to place my foot, well, for timpani, it's where am I going to place my foot to get over there to retune at this moment while I'm hitting a drum over here with this hand. For percussion, it's how am I going to get from one instrument to the other. And that's the late 20th century, early 21st century aspect.
Yeah, it's a good thing people don't realize is that, let's say a larger symphony will have, let's say, five percussion players on a larger scale, but it may be 10 instruments that are back there. And yeah, the choreography is fascinating. Something like, oh my God, I have to go from one side of the stage, go backstage, come back to the other side of the stage and play. Yeah, it's something the audience might not see.
Or you have a table full of small instruments and you have to put one down without making extra noise, pick up the other one, get the right mallet, play that, put it back down, go, all that sort of thing.
Or two instruments at the same time with different hands. Christmas pops.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
No, yeah. The Christmas problem is how do you get the sleigh bells down without them,
You got to tie a string on them. And, Matthew and Todd were talking about this. Like sometimes it's not only our individual setup, but then we have to talk about how to coordinate the needs of the section. And, what we try to go for is we try to create a setup that'll work for the whole concert, so to speak. But there's a lot of times where we just can't do that. So we might have to do like a set change either after a tune or at the break or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. Well, it's as I say, it's a fascinating thing. It seems to me, at least in my experience, most percussion sections, people have to be team players because of this. Yes?
Of course.
Todd is...
It works better when they are, that's for sure.
It works better when they are, yeah.
Yeah.
No, well, I'm very grateful to have you guys as part of our section, and things seem to be going very smoothly. And I miss you greatly. I really wish we could get together and do some playing, but it looks like we might be seeing a light at the end of the tunnel, and I can't wait to be able to be making live music again. I did want to ask you about auditions, because for me this is one of the most fascinating parts of your world. So other instruments, even in the woodwind section, we may have multiple parts of a family. Somebody will play oboe and English horn or piccolo and flute. But a percussion section audition is basically playing how many instruments? At least 5? Depends what the orchestra asks, 7? What have you seen? What are your experiences in this? Because we're sitting on the back of the panel. By the way, unlike other sections, there's no other family to represent. If you're lucky, you have a principal timpanist who can sit on a percussion audition or vice versa. But the panel is made up of people who basically don't know anything about percussion. Yeah. So first of all, what is it like taking an audition from the other side? And 2, being aware of that, does it affect how you play an audition, knowing that on the other side of the screen, you may have people who are not actually percussionists and are focused on different things than maybe you would be?
Yeah, absolutely, to all of those questions.
Yes.
I'd say we play very differently for auditions. And there are players, we call them auditioners, and it takes, I believe that there's amazing, a lot of amazing players, young players out there right now that are nailing these auditions, that are unbelievable at audition repertoire, but that doesn't necessarily translate into playing music with other musicians. And that's really at the core of what you're saying. When we go to auditions, we are playing for a panel of people who are sitting there listening to us play solos. We're trying to show as much music as we can in that moment. I play timpani auditions totally differently than I would play in the orchestra in Asheville. And that depends on the room, the people you're playing for, the style, the conductor. Do they want, what kind of sound do they want? You try to figure out what kind of sound the orchestra is going for. But
do you get a lot of feedback from the other side of the screen? Do you get people asking you to do things differently?
Well, if you're getting feedback, that's a good sign. Auditions are pressure packed. And if you don't get any feedback and they just say thank you, then that generally means that you can go home. If you're getting a lot of feedback, that means you're doing well. and they want to hear if you can, if you can adjust your sound. I think every audition I've ever gotten any distance into, I've gotten a lot of feedback. Can you play this a little bit differently? Can you, and you know, a lot of times when you're describing timbre, you don't use musical terms. You know, can you make that cymbal crash flower more, or you know, some term like that? And so you're sitting there at an audition going, all right, be the flower, you know. And if you can nail what they're going for, that's you know, that's winning an audition. So you guys speak to the amount of instruments, though. I think that was kind of at the core of Darko's initial question.
Yeah.
Well,
what do you have to prepare as a percussionist? Yeah.
I mean, it's typically snare. I mean, in no particular, Matthew, we you know, in no particular order: snare drum, xylo, triangle, tambourine, bass drum, crash cymbals. Did I say glockenspiel?
Yeah.
I've lost count.
I'm up to 7.
Drum set now.
Drum set, something on marimba.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, solo buff on marimba is a great thing. I do love that.
Yeah.
But it's yeah.
And I would say for the people listening, and hey y'all again, you're here. Sometimes we get conversation. It's just like we're talking.
Yeah, we get lost if we have an audience. We actually do.
I would say one of the things you probably don't understand about percussion is that the hardest stuff to play is not the loudest, most dramatic stuff. That's usually pretty easy. You just sit in the pocket and flow on that. But the hardest stuff to play is the soft, delicate percussion parts. And so that's a lot of auditioning is, can you control your physical nerves and play very delicate passages? Because you get this little shake, you know, when you get nervous. And so that's a lot of what we battle, I think.
2 of my favorite audition pieces in percussion, I don't know if I should call them favorites, but like that are always present and always tell a lot. Tchaikovsky Fourth Symphony, last movement cymbal part, and Rachmaninoff Piano Concerto number 2, the soft stuff. Yeah. And inevitably the soft stuff tells you more than Tchaikovsky, because Tchaikovsky, by the time you get to syncopations, you've lost count because you don't have the rest of the orchestra to play off of. It's like, It's very difficult to tell at that moment if what you're trying to hear. You're listening more to the ability of direction, phrase, power, etc. But yeah, the soft stuff is very, very telling. And what other excerpts do you find kind of in that nature on different instruments? We see, like, I know we see Porgy and Bess on every time. That's like a
Porgy on xylo, Scheherazade on snare drum,
right?
One of the movements or all of them.
Yep.
Sorcerer's Apprentice on Glock was a big one.
Yeah.
Romeo and Juliet cymbals.
Bass drum. Rite of Spring or
Rite of Spring, although I mean Rite of Spring, Mahler.
Third Symphony, Mahler, was that what would, or Fifth Symphony? Which one?
I think is it fourth? I'm sorry.
I've had a couple where it was 2 and 4. I've had a variety.
2 and 4. Okay.
Tambourine, Carnival Overture, some Stravinsky, I'm sure, you know.
Yeah.
For tambourine.
But yeah, for those listening right now, what Darko was talking about with the Tchaikovsky, the Tchaikovsky cymbal part is like and it's all loud and in your face and really big. And so that's the Tchaikovsky, and then the other side of that, the soft part.
Rock 3 or something.
No. You played it last time. Yeah. Brian, didn't you play this last season?
2 seasons ago. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's this really soft control. Just so yeah.
It's walking on eggshells in the soundscape, you know.
And it is so easy to play too loud. Percussion is just easy to play too loud, you know. It's easy to hit something hard. It's hard to just do the refined motions. So something to listen for with an educated ear.
Speaking of education,
Okay.
I mentioned earlier Brian works with our youth orchestra kids, and you have a West African drumming ensemble that you lead. What is that like, and how different is that style of playing compared to what you do for the Asheville Symphony? Both in terms of
Sure.
teaching and just maybe give people a little bit of background on the nature of West African percussion in case they don't know
Sure. Well,
the philosophy.
The motivation, first off, was that I was looking to increase interest and excitement in orchestral percussion. And I don't feel bad about saying this, but most of the younger people are not as excited about orchestral percussion as they are like marching band or playing drum set in a jazz band or a rock band. It's a stereotype. It's a trait that existed when I was that age, and I'm not blind to the fact that that happens now. And so when
we should state the obvious. You were playing 20 times more in band and marching band in anything other than orchestra when you were a teenager.
Yeah,
you're active way more.
Yeah, and
right?
of course, some of that is maturity, right? You know, your maturity level and what makes you excited as a teenager or whatnot. But instead of fighting that, right? Instead of fighting that, I just said, well, I need to do a variety of things. And so we didn't jump right into the African ensemble. It started off by just teaching the kids more about rudiments and teaching them the skills that they could apply when they went back to their high school to be like in their marching band. And of course, and addressing the concert band or orchestra side of things. And then I wanted to capitalize on, I found that I needed to work on their engagement, right? A lot of kids are like distracted. And so jumping to the African ensemble, what was nice about it is that I don't put music in front of them. They essentially just have to put a drum on and they have to look at me and I look at them and I give them something to play. And so they have to constantly be engaged. And so it worked on that aspect. And then the performing aspect, and communicating through your music to the audience and building confidence, right? Like, so engagement, performing, building confidence through performance were really the main impetus for starting an African ensemble.
I love it.
With the youth symphony, and variety and culture and an opportunity to, I'm a well-rounded percussionist. I like to do a lot of different things. I wouldn't say that I'm just great at this one aspect, right? And so it kind of fits my mission as an educator. When I'm teaching my college students, I want them to be able to teach and perform in a variety of ensembles and settings. And so I kind of took that logic to the youth symphony. And, of course, I'm hoping that a lot of the students in the youth symphony would decide to go off and do music for a career, but not all of them are going to, And so in an attempt to give them the best experience possible. And people like it. There's that too, right?
It's exciting music. I heard you perform. Sorry, Matthew. I heard you perform last year the youth orchestra concert it was in February, right? Before the quarantine was the last time you guys performed. Was that it?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah, and you had this beautiful it was part of the entire youth orchestra family performance, and it was such a wonderful way to break the let's say the spirit of the performance was something completely different.
Yeah.
It was exciting. It was short. It's foot tapping. And what I love about the style of playing, as you say, they have to pay attention to you, but it's also like a true collaboration in the ensemble. It really is an ensemble. It doesn't work. One instrument by itself is interesting to hear, but it's the ensemble together. The way the let's say the philosophy of the music making is kind of unique in a way. It's not about color. It's more like speech, is it not?
Yes, exactly.
It's
call and
from
answer.
speaking.
Yeah, it's from speaking. It comes from speaking, of course. And yeah, the engagement of all the parts and how they fit together. And it's like a conversation. You know, you try not to speak over somebody else. You might be in the background or whatever and waiting for your opportunity to speak clearly. And
Right.
that's kind of the way that works. And, you know,
Matthew,
and it teaches the fun, I'll be done here, but it also just teaches the fundamentals of steady beat and rhythm in a very fun way, you know, as opposed to like, okay, we're going to put the metronome on, everyone get 2 pairs of sticks. And now we're going to, you know, which I do that too, you know what I mean? Like we do that too, but this is it just connects with the students better, I think. Matthew.
I'm very curious. Yeah, I'll put this on a bookmark. We have to let Matthew speak. It's been like.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say that, Brian, I'm so glad that you do that ensemble for a lot of the reasons, a lot of the ones that were just mentioned, but also that the fact that the kind of traditional conservatory model of what a percussionist should learn doesn't really work anymore. You know, there's so few people who can study that old-fashioned way and get out and make a living. And you not only it does the African ensemble and other things like that excite the kids and get them pumped, but it's also just they've got to have that wider perspective on what music is to be successful musicians today.
Agreed.
Yeah, the world is changing for sure. What I was gonna say is like, what did people do prior to whatever Melzel inventing the metronome in the early 19th century? What did they do in the 18th century? Like, how did they keep steady?
They trusted their local percussionists who just had good
you know,
and conductors. Yeah.
Pendulum? I don't know.
Yeah.
Clocks.
Well, I mean, that's where the original, right? I mean, those Seth,
right?
I've got a Seth Thomas metronome, and of course it doesn't tick in time. It's like tick, 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 you know, it's got a lilt to it.
It's the Bulgarian metronome.
Yes.
5/8 metronome.
Right. Well, and you know, when something that I think a lot of people who aren't percussionists don't think about is that the sense of metronomic steady time is a relatively new idea. And it's still, there's a difference in how a string player feels rhythm versus how a brass player feels it versus how a percussionist feels it. There is no absolutely correct rhythm, and except unless a computer does it, and then it has no soul usually. Right?
That's true.
So we're always playing with that, like, well, we want it to be correct, we want it to be steady, but it also has to have a life, and how you give it that life is dependent on what type of music it is, what kind of situation you're in, what instrument you're on. There's so many variables in what makes a rhythm feel good.
Yeah, and culturally speaking, there's different approaches as well. I was going to say with the African ensemble, just to tie it into my own experience lately, I've been taking lessons since COVID. For some reason, I didn't realize that you could take lessons online with people who are in different places until we had a global pandemic. And then I just woke up one day, so I've been taking lessons with a percussionist in Brazil.
Nice.
Talking a lot about West African percussion as it relates to his own country's traditions. And one of the interesting things he said, and I got this, I was reading, and Brian has exposed me to some of the resources he uses to teach West African percussion, and really from percussion from Mali, basically, is the main idea. And one of the most interesting concepts that they get is like the musical goal is not to take a journey. It's not, we're going to start you here, we're going to tell a story, and you're going to travel. Like a lot of our orchestral music from Europe is that way. I think of the sonata allegro model, the heroic music of Beethoven. A lot of times we put our own stories with it, but it's not about taking you on a journey. It's about sitting you down in a moment and letting you be present in that moment. So you do that within that groove. And a lot of religions point to this. Don't live in the future, don't live in the past, but live in this particular moment. And I think that's extremely valuable for everybody to learn. And that's a huge cultural difference. When you're talking about one world culture now, and you're talking about all the issues we're having in society between different perceived races and things like this. This is one of the huge differences in our approach to music. You know, what is our aesthetic goal? Is it to be right in that moment? Is it to tell a story? And that's something our kids can get by being in the African ensemble. So, Brian, I just wanted to add that.
That was great. I might steal that from you.
Yeah, absolutely.
No,
That's great.
It's simple and very profound. And
It is.
I can tell you from my experience, when it is, you know, we have music and classical music that is mostly European, but not entirely.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We have pieces from South America. We did a concert like a year ago at the beginning of the season with Ginastera, who is, you know, an Argentinian white dude of Italian origin, writing music that's folk music in Argentina that somehow has roots eventually, especially for the malambo, back in Africa. We have Sensemaya, which is written by Revueltas, Mexican composer, who uses a Cuban poem about a snake sacrifice, you know, with an extensive percussion section. Like, and you have to approach the pieces in a different way. You're absolutely right. You cannot think of them in narrative. You cannot even think of them necessarily as character. It's about finding like the groove of the music necessarily. Okay, in Revueltas, Revueltas is definitely a story, but Ginastera, Malambo, like, you know, it is a story, but it's like one music over and 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 over again. And the power builds organically within. It's not the same mindset. And I find, you know, you really have to be conscious of that as a musician approaching it. Jason, our concertmaster, has the wonderful little saying about the dialect. He's like, well, this is not our dialect. We have to learn the dialect. We have to get used to the style of playing this. And, you know, I think coming back to what Brian is doing in the youth orchestra, it's an incredibly valuable thing to opens one's eyes to a completely different way of music making. One thing I can personally regret, I'm a string player, so I'm like super traditional education. You know, I wish I'd played jazz cello as a kid or something like this, you know. It really is. I think, especially nowadays, having the broader approach in music education is very, very valuable. So, again, thank you for doing that, and yeah, I love it. I was going to ask, have any of you studied Indian percussion or maybe gamelan, which is from Indonesia? Do you have experience with any of that?
I was thinking about Indian percussion when you guys were talking about the metronome, because in my mind, some of the great tabla players or mridangam drum players from India are, and I always say this to my students, the most amazing percussionists in the world. Like their drumming ability. I mean, I can watch drum set players are amazing because you're playing four limbs like an organ, but I can watch these tabla players and just be absolutely blown away, but it's never metronomic. It always is breathing. It's like a Rolling Stone song. There are moments when it goes forward and moments when it goes backwards. I have tabla around, but I've never really studied. I've played in gamelan, but I've never really studied either of them. What about you guys?
I played in one semester, or maybe it wasn't even a semester. Just maybe we brought somebody in at UMass who, I'm trying to remember his name. He came from Vermont, but he brought his gamelan ensemble and we played together for like 2 weeks or whatever. It was cool.
What is that like? That I've seen a gamelan before in Indonesia, and it's like, it just seems like a flurry of hammers on these instruments. I'm like,
it's a lot of metal.
It's unbelievable.
It's
Yeah,
all
very
interlocking.
resonant.
So every part is relatively simple. You have to memorize them. They don't teach by, but when you put them all together, that's where the structure of the music.
Yeah.
And usually there's I mean, I'm not an expert on gamelan, but usually each sound has a pattern that repeats. And then like Todd was saying, they interlock and they have different patterns, and the cycles will happen in different places, and then they'll arrive together every once in a while.
And most instruments in a gamelan are paired. And one person plays kind of the in-breath instrument and one person plays kind of the out-breath instrument. And they're micro micro intervals, Western musical intervals apart, so that they'll actually do what we would consider to be the most out of tune sound possible, which is
Yes.
beating of the notes. But they tune it for that. They say that that brings it to life. You takes both the in breath and the out breath to live. And so you've got two people playing the same part, and it's really out of tune to a string player. My wife can't listen to it, but I love it. So she's a violinist, by the way. Just so.
I was gonna say she's a violinist. Yeah. Wonderful. Before
Matthew,
we go, I just want to.
Have you?
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Darko, but Matthew.
No, we're skipping up here, Matthew.
You play a lot of jazz percussion, and Matthew is an unbelievable vibraphonist. And so, have you played any gamelan before? Is that part of your experience?
I've never had the chance to play gamelan. Yeah. I've played a little bit of Indian music and studied the rhythmic structures a lot. Played a lot of African music. Right. Never had the chance to play gamelan. I would love to.
Yeah. So, what kind of African percussion did you study?
Mostly just a lot of traditional djembe, like what Brian teaches to the kids. I'm about to get into learning some balafon. We have a traditional, African ensemble here at UNCA that I don't direct, but I play with them sometimes. I'm going to start learning some of the traditional balafon parts, which is the African ancestor of the xylophone.
Wow!
So I'm looking forward to doing that.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And that brings us back kind of to the beginning. Like you're talking about the instruments we play. Well, we play xylophone and vibraphone and chimes and glockenspiel in our orchestra. And then if you want to go multicultural, the balafon from Africa, the Mexican marimba, all of the instruments of a gamelan ensemble.
All the hand drums from the various cultures. Yeah.
Do things translate easily?
I think so. One of the it depends. Well, I mean, there are skill sets that that we learn that you can apply to a lot of different instruments. But then
like hitting things.
Well, I mean, yeah, we don't want to get into it, but I mean, I do teach like a transfer of skill set, master class. But then once you start to hone in on a particular instrument, there are idiosyncrasies for that particular, and sometimes more than others. But I think there are some similarities,
But let me just say, when I went to play the gamelan, and I haven't done it much, it's kind of your experience, Brian, a couple of weeks, but when I went to play, if they would write down the patterns that I was supposed to play, I would play it first time, no problem, because I have the ability to look at a visual chart and to hit something at the right time. But they wouldn't do that. They were mean about it.
Oral tradition.
Like, no, you don't write this down.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, some of the students struggle with that in the African ensemble. Like, even though what I teach them, I have it written out, I don't give it to them until the end of class. When I say, now here it is, go home and make sure you can do it.
Yeah.
It's a leap of faith kind of situation,
Well, and it teaches, it's like teaching by rote. Simon Says, do what I do. I mean, there's a skill, there's a lot of logic to teaching that way.
But there is also, sorry, I always keep interrupting Matthew. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Go ahead.
I just want to say it also, that approach plays into, like we were talking about earlier, the sense of what rhythm is and what rhythm's role is, right? Once you put it on a page, you've defined it in a way that some cultures would assume takes the life out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Nailing it down to something you can put on a page that's not really the music.
It's a suggestion.
Yeah.
It's a suggestion. Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was going to say. That notating something often, in a way, takes the life out of things. When you learn it by rote, you're learning the spirit of a gesture. And one of the wonderful challenges of being a classical musician is taking the reverse, to look at the piece of paper and to think, what is actually the spirit? How do we find it together? And of course, that's what the beauty of coming together and as an orchestra is. Gentlemen, it's noon. I just want to thank you so much for everything. Thank you to our guests. Thank you for the comments, Lee and Carol especially. Thank you for for engaging with us. I want to wish everybody a lovely rest of the day, and I can't wait to get back together. Seeing that timpani, hearing that timpani at the beginning of our little thing. I will tell you, the last musical thing we did with the Asheville Symphony prior to the pandemic starting in March was that Todd and I talked about buying new timpani heads for our upcoming recording of Beethoven's 7th Symphony, which were hastily shipped from Ireland, was it? Where did we get them?
That's correct.
Ireland.
Calf
Yes.
skinheads.
Oh, you got calf.
Alpha.
You got calf. Yeah.
Yeah, we wanted to have calf skinheads.
Of course.
And that is an example of a conductor and a timpanist working well together. Thank you. That's awesome.
Thank you. No, and I can't wait to use them. But thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you as soon as possible.
Thank you, Darko.
Absolutely.
And thank you to our audience.
Be well. Happy holidays.
We'll see you next time. Happy
Happy
holidays.
holidays.
See you, Brian. See you, Matthew.
Take care. We'll be in touch.
See you guys.
Right on.